Hello, Marvel Legends, and welcome to another episode of Displaying Model Behavior. And we're in for a big treat today. Well, if I say so myself, because I like this idea I'm going to do. But first, speaking of awesome things that I really like, oh my goodness, I got some fan art, and this is just kind of mind-blowing. From Amy Rose on Instagram. Check this out. Oh my god, it's me and Piglet. I'm blown away, absolutely blown away by this. I hesitate to use the word fan art because it's not like a fan, but it's just someone who's like, hey, I dig what you do, have a picture. If that's fan art, then that's fan art. But look at this, is insane. This is absolutely beautiful. Look at Piggy. Look at little Piggy. She's caught her so beautifully, the little angel face. I'm kind of speechless. So this is just beautiful. Amy Rose, thank you so much. Is that a Sonic reference? Either way, guys, go onto Instagram. I've put her ID below. Check out Amy Rose for any illustration work you might need, or just to look at the incredible, badass work that she does, because it's all awesome stuff that we love. She does Star Wars and sci-fi, but in this beautiful, I don't know, is it charcoal, pencil? I don't understand art things. But it's just stunning, absolutely beautiful. So Amy, thank you so much. That's going up on the wall. That's going to be a constant backdrop now. I'm so happy. Amy Rose killing the game, guys. Go check her out on Instagram. So now, the reason why we're here is another top 10, and it's a fun top 10, this one. This is the top 10 times that the hero has fought the wrong villain. And I love that, because one of the greatest things about Marvel Comics, or the Marvel Universe in general, is that everything feels so interconnected and interwoven. In my Christmas episode, I was talking about how I love the fact that the X-Men are walking through Times Square and just randomly you see the Punisher walking past, and it's like, oh, they're all in the same world. That's so cool. Well, this is another example of that, where you have heroes and villains who don't normally interact come together for a crossover, because why wouldn't they? Just circumstances bring them together. So here we are, kicking off the top 10 heroes who fought the wrong villain. We have my favorite Marvel legend, arguably, if you ever wonder. I keep forgetting about him, but Ben Reilly, Spider-Man. My favorite, I gotta remember where the lens is. My favorite, and does this help focus? Maybe a little bit. I've still got to work out the best way of using this camera. But Ben Reilly, Spider-Man. So in the mid-90s, of course, Peter Parker, who we all know and love, thought that he was the clone, and Ben Reilly took over as Spider-Man. This is the Ben Reilly costume with the Scarlet Spider blonde head on here. I think it just works so well. I love this figure. So at one point in the mid-90s, well, actually it wasn't in the mid-90s, this was a flashback story. So the story came out in the 2000 and blah, but it was a great 4-issue limited series, Spider-Man and the X-Men. And each issue took place in a different time frame. So the first issue took place with young teenage Spider-Man and the original, well, it's always the classic 5 X-Men. Or is it? No, it's not. No, I take that back. But it's the different generation. So the first issue was young teenage Spider-Man and the yellow and blue X-Men. Then the second issue was black costume Spider-Man and the 80s X-Men. And issue 3 was 90s-tacular. It was the clone Spider-Man, and it was the X-Men team with Storm, with the black costume, with Wolverine, with the bone claws, and they take on Sinister and Carnage. And that in itself is so cool. I mean, a story with Sinister and Carnage, what a great combination to have. So our first story of heroes fighting the wrong villains, we have Ben Reilly, Spider-Man, and Mr. Sinister. And this was so cool because even though the 4 issues of the story were spanning over different decades and time periods. The story itself, even in Marvel continuity, each issue was set like far apart from the other one. It all tied into one overarching story of this nefarious plot by Mr. Sinister. And in this issue with Ben Reilly and Carnage, Sinister decides that he can use the Carnage symbiote to kind of stabilize his clones. Because that's a funny sort of crossover that, you know, they have actually had more references to Sinister and Miles Warren, the Jackal, and cloning. So the X-Men and Spider-Man team up to stop him from doing so. And they have these great interactions where, you know, Spider-Man doesn't remember everything about the X-Men because he missed 5 years worth of continuity basically. And Wolverine can tell that he's not the Peter Parker they're used to. And he's like, what is it, bub? Mind control? Someone manipulating you? You want dope? What is it? That's really fun. And Ben Reilly's like, it's a long story. And ultimately, it's kind of Ben Reilly who defeats Sinister, because obviously Sinister has psychic abilities as well. And Ben Reilly kind of goads him into entering into Riley's mind. And of course, when he does, he sees sort of all the horrors that Riley's been subjected to. He sees Riley in the clone tank with the Jackal and all of that. And he's like, I want none of this. So that was kind of cool actually, because now that, you know, we know that Riley was the clone, we can do stories like this where Sinister even then realized that Riley was the clone, and Riley was like, I don't know what he was so upset about. I don't know what he saw, but he wasn't happy about it. Oh, Ben Reilly, you're in for some surprises. But yeah, as a number 10 spot, this was a great time that a hero fought the wrong villain. Coming in next, we have 2 massive Marvel heavy hitters. We have, representing the mutants and the X-Men, Sabertooth. Is that how you pronounce his name? Sabertooth? That's how I've always sort of said it in my head. But yes, we have Apocalypse. I love this Apocalypse bat. Just so big, so gorgeous. Probably the main reason I started collecting the X-Men, because I was like, I gotta have this Apocalypse. But then once I got him, I was like, well, I guess I need all the X-Men now, and X-Force, and X-Factor, and it just went on from there. But yeah, this Apocalypse is so badass. So in the mid-90s, we just had the Onslaught storyline wrap up, and at the end of Onslaught, all of the Marvel heroes, Fantastic Four, Avengers, and kind of the Hulk disappear into this other reality. But what happened is that when the Hulk fought Onslaught, there was like a huge sort of psychic explosion, and the Hulk and Bruce Banner were separated, like physically separated. Now, I'm not a Hulk expert, so I don't know if that's ever happened before. I don't think it has, but you know, tell me if I'm wrong. But when the characters get separated into the 2 physical entities, it's Bruce Banner who disappears into the other universe, leaving just the Hulk in the 616. And that's where we get this kind of crossover here, where it's Apocalypse and the Hulk. And this is really interesting. It's not so much like a fight as such, but it's an interaction that you would never sort of expect, because Apocalypse is always, it's just mutants, X-Men, mutants, X-Factor, Archangel, the Summers DNA, Cable. It's never the wider Marvel universe. So when he has these interactions with the Hulk, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. So in the wake of Onslaught, Apocalypse is looking for, he's always, Apocalypse just wants friends, really. That's all he ever wants, because he's always trying to build his horsemen. And it's like, he says like, I don't want friends, I want horsemen. It's like, do you? Or do you just want some friends? So Apocalypse decides that Hulk, understandably, is the strongest. That's always been Apocalypse's kind of credo, is survival of the fittest. And, who is more suited to survival than the Hulk? So Apocalypse approaches the Hulk, who's kind of like at a loose end after he's lost Bruce Banner's sort of psyche, and Onslaught is done, and Apocalypse approaches him and he's like, bruh, I want to make you my horseman of war, I think. And Hulk is like, yeah, go on then. So Apocalypse makes the Hulk his horseman of war, and he gets a cool sort of horseman makeover, which they could Hasbro could so easily retool this Hulk into a war horseman. I would love to see that, because he gets like a badass like helmet, and he looks a little bit sort of Planet Hulkish. So he gets like a black sort of skull-looking helmet, like a big sort of armory kind of piece, and for a short time, a very short time, for a cup of coffee, he becomes Apocalypse's horseman. And all I remember him doing in that period is just bitch-slapping Juggernaut, which, you know, he does most of the time anyway. But still, it was a really fun, unusual interaction that we don't normally get. Coming up next, we go back to Dark Reign. So we have the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, and this is at the time in the comics where Osborn is kind of just dominating everything in the Marvel Universe, but there's one guy who can see the forest through the trees, who knows that Osborn is not the savior he purports to be, and that is Frank Castle, the Punisher. And I love this kind of mashup of the Green Goblin fighting a hero who's not Spider-Man related, because the thing with Green Goblin is everything about his character is so Spider-Man oriented because it's all personal. Originally, you know, he was that classic 1960s bank robber after money and power or whatever. But then as soon as Peter Parker Spider-Man got into the mix, which was instantly, it became an obsession with Spider-Man. So all of Goblin's plans and schemes revolved around Peter Parker. And I can imagine that when Norman Osborn took power in the Marvel Universe and, you know, created Hammer and whatnot, Peter must have been like, oh, so you're fighting other heroes now? And it was the Punisher who was the main guy who was like, this ain't right. When Osborn took power, he was like, nah, you're no good, pal. I'm going to expose you. And that essentially, that's what he tried to do. Well, you know, exposing someone isn't the Punisher's routine. He tried to shoot him in the head. So the Punisher began like sort of a war against Norman Osborn. Unfortunately, even though the Punisher is never outmanned, he was definitely outgunned. So essentially, the Punisher tried to just assassinate Norman Osborn. I love this Wolverine's Punisher, by the way. I think it's the perfect combination of all the different Punishers. But yes, so Norman Osborn was making a public appearance and, you know, sort of kissing babies and whatnot. And the Punisher has him in his sights. He fires the bullet, but what happens? Boom! The Sentry is like, not today, pal. And again, it's just another wonderful example of the Sentry basically being Norman Osborn's bodyguard. But it's not the Sentry who Osborn sends after Punisher, it is Daken. And Daken, the son of Wolverine, it's a great story. I highly recommend you read it. It's kind of a cat and mouse sort of thing, because what I love about the Punisher fighting superpowered people is that he's always going to be outgunned. You know, he's always going to be the underdog, but he really gives Daken a run for his money until eventually his luck runs out and Daken literally eviscerates him, chops him up into pieces, and then, you know, we get the Frankencastle storyline, which I never actually read, but it looks kind of like goofy fun. But this is a fun hero-villain combination that I didn't think we'd ever get. Speaking of fun combinations, here we have Carnage, and Carnage of course is a Spider-Man / Venom villain, but because he is such an evil, powerful dick, whenever he goes on a rampage, it usually takes a combined force of Marvel heroes to take him down. So of course with Maximum Carnage you had Spider-Man, Iron Fist, Captain America, Cloak and Dagger, Black Cat, Venom, all sorts. But there was one 4-issue story where it was just mano a mano, Carnage and Deadpool, the merc with a mouth, and this was an absolutely bonkers story, and I love the concept behind it because it was very, very funny. And Deadpool doesn't often tickle me, but this was a great sort of idea, because the whole point of Carnage, if you don't actually know, like a lot of people think like, oh, he's just a maniac who likes to kill people, and yes, he is, but his sort of mantra, his raison d'etre, if you will, is that Carnage believes that there is no point, no logic in life. What makes sense shouldn't make sense. So he will always be like the most unpredictable entity in the world. And he's like, no one can predict what I'm gonna do. No one can predict where I'm gonna go, who I'm gonna kill, why I'm gonna do it. I am completely unpredictable. So he was on a typical like cross-country rampage and no one knew sort of where he was gonna pop up next, except for this guy. Because Deadpool, being as completely bonkers, cuckoo bananas that he is, he actually can understand the logic behind what Cletus Cassidy is doing. And that drives Carnage insane. And it's so amusing to watch because Deadpool is the only person who can actually predict what Carnage is going to do, because as much as it kills him, Carnage does follow a pattern. He has logic behind what he does that he can't even see. He thinks that he's just doing this random killing and acts of violence, and Deadpool's like, no, you're actually really predictable. I can predict what you're going to do. And he's like, no, I'm completely unpredictable. I'm madness. I'm chaos. I can't be predicted. And Deadpool's like, yeah, you can. Yeah, you're basic. I know exactly what you're going to do. And that's the basis for this story. And it's so much fun. It's so brutal and violent and ridiculous. And by the end of it, Deadpool absorbs all the Life Foundation symbiotes, and we get this great Deadpool symbiote mashup. Not like Venom Pool, but because it's the 4 or 5 different Life Foundation symbiotes. He's all multicolored, and it's a really cool design. It's a really fun story. It's wacky, it's bonkers, and it's one of the not few, but one of the selection of Deadpool stories that I really dig. Now we have one of the most popular ex-villains / heroes / anti-heroes. We have Sabertooth. Now, this was one where I was thinking, like, who shall I use for this? Because there's one Spider-Man story called the Assassination Plot, and Sabertooth features in that, although I was really disappointed when I read it, because he only sort of features right at the end, and it's not a very prominent role. You see, I always saw this issue of Amazing Spider-Man in the back issue bins with Sabertooth on the front cover, and I'm like, oh, Spider-Man fights Sabertooth? Awesome, that seems like a really cool story. But actually Sabertooth is more just a character in that, as opposed to like the main villain. But one interesting sort of tidbit for Sabertooth is that we always know that he is Wolverine's antagonist, but he did not debut in a Wolverine or X-Men comic. He debuted in Iron Fist. And this was a interesting combination because it's like, ever since then, they haven't really interacted all that much. But Victor Creed made his first appearance in Iron Fist, and it's a combination, like, as far as villains and heroes and people who would have a good fight, makes perfect sense. They're both hand-to-hand combatants. You could argue that Sabertooth way outmatches Iron Fist with, speed and power and his healing factor, but of course Iron Fist has the name, the name is a bit of a giveaway. He has the Fist of Kunlun, is that right? My knowledge is spotty sometimes, but they have a great brawl, and this is before Sabertooth is actually, defined as a character. As many characters do, they kind of evolve over time. So at first, Sabertooth didn't have a specific backstory, and then people were thinking and contemplating the idea of, oh, maybe he can be Wolverine's father, and sort of tying him in that way. Eventually, of course, they both became, members of the Weapon X program and whatnot, and the rest is history. But when Sabertooth first debuted, it wasn't Wolverine, but it was Iron Fist, who he locked up with. Now, this is kind of a fun one. We have Iron Man, Tony Stark. So a character who is always very technology-based, and he's always sort of dealing with villains who are armored, or the Mandarin, of course. He has his kind of rogues gallery, which isn't like that complex. Spider-Man has an amazing rogues gallery. Iron Man is a little bit more limited, but because of that, he can borrow from others sometimes. And this is a story set in the mid-90s, or took place in the mid-90s. So of course, what villain are we gonna have pop up all over the place in the mid-90s? It is, of course, Eddie Brock, Venom. I'm using the movie Venom just because I don't really have any other reasons to use him. And he's kind of going a bit unloved, but he's a really fun figure, so why not use movie Venom? And yes, Venom... Oh wow, that was a big one. That's gonna take me a while to clean up. Movie Venom here, representing 90s Venom, 90s Eddie Brock. And in this particular Iron Man story, this is during the time in Venom's sort of comic book career where he is the lethal protector, or he's going in that route. And he sort of decides, it's kind of a shame because the lethal protector, it's cool, it's Venom getting over as a hero and being popular, but he's such a dumbass in so many of his stories, because it's always him seeing a hero and being like, oh no, I think you're a villain because of X, Y, and Z, I'm gonna fight you. And it's like, oh, Brock, you're kind of an idiot. But yeah, so he decides that Iron Man has got to go. He's guts to go. So he attacks, the Stark HQ and basically rampages his way through it, looking for Tony Stark, because he believes that Stark is like, corporate greed and all that kind of thing, and abusing the little man and whatnot. Maybe he is a major CEO. But what happens is we get a fun kind of cat and mouse chase through the Stark Tower, because Tony's just not in his armor at the time. This is years before Extremis and all those kinds of things, so Stark has to go to his armor. So they have a Tom and Jerry cat and mouse where Venom is trashing and smashing his way through Stark's HQ to get to him, and Tony is desperately trying to find his way to his armor. And it's cool, it's a fun story. And of course, as is always the case with mid-90s heroes and villain crossovers, or hero and hero crossovers, they both kind of come out of it unscathed and probably better people at the end. Now, sticking with Venom, I'm doing a twofer here with Venom. He also has a few interactions with Daredevil. Of course, during all of these Daredevil stories, he's in his red costume, but I don't have a red costume Daredevil. So we're having the red and mustard. I gotta stop doing that. Yeah, we have the McDonald's red and yellow Daredevil here. And one particular story that I'm harkening back to is the trial of Venom. So Eddie Brock finally gets captured and put on trial, and who's the public defender? The only public defender in the Marvel Universe. It is Daredevil. But of course, you can't have Daredevil defending a superpowered person without them eventually tussling and breaking loose. And I believe Carnage is brought in as like a character witness for the prosecution, I do believe. But of course, it all breaks down, but it's a fun combination. Again, I love the idea of supervillains being put on trial and actually seeing the due process of how they go about sort of explaining their actions and stuff. I love a good court scene, and this was a fun court scene where it's just completely bonkers, totally insane, but it's a great Venom Daredevil crossover. And is Venom a character who Daredevil shouldn't fight? I mean, they're both sort of street based, but Venom is so Spider-Man oriented. It was really good fun to see Daredevil pop up. Our penultimate combination is the wondrous wall crawler Spider-Man, and this is going back to really early Spider-Man. We're talking not even in the double digits. So we have young, high school, unsure of himself, slightly goofy and silly Peter Parker, and who does he end up tangling with? Only bloody Dr. Doom. That's a ridiculous combination as far as, power and ability and just sort of taking things serious and not so much. And it's a really interesting little character portrait, because we have this kid of Spider-Man who's like so unsure of himself and just trying to understand his powers and his place in the world. And then we have Dr. Doom, who's like the most high-end ultra boss of all Marvel villains. And it's funny because this story, which takes place right at the genesis of Spider-Man's career, actually kind of paints the relationship between Spider-Man and Doom going forwards. They have had more interactions than you might realize, and the whole time Spidey and Doom have this weird kind of relationship where it's like Doom tolerates Spider-Man when he doesn't really have to. And I love that idea of the character, in that I think Doom can see that Spider-Man, again, like I said with the Punisher, often outmanned, never outgunned, or often outnumbered, never outmanned. You know what I'm saying. Even though he's underpowered, he will still always fight the good fight and stand up for what's right. And again, Doom is one of those people who does not see himself as a villain. He believes that everything he's doing is right and justified, and it's a means to an end and whatnot. So he's not gonna, destroy Spider-Man because he inconveniences him. I think Doom kind of sees Spider-Man and he's like, you're an idiot, but I kind of appreciate some of the things that you do. I mean, granted, if Doom ever had to, he would kill Spider-Man like that. But luckily for Peter Parker, that's never been the issue. And instead, over the last 50 years, the characters have always had this kind of begrudging, not even respect, but just kind of like acknowledgement of each other. And for Dr. Doom, that's saying a lot. And finally, as a villain who fought the wrong hero, we have Dr. Octopus. Now, this one, I probably shouldn't have saved this until last because it's a bit of a bummer, but it's a really great story and idea and concept, so we're going with it. We have Dr. Octopus, who's a character, again, I really like because he's a genius. And he actually, you know, even though he's an evil, maniacal supervillain, that doesn't detract from the fact that he is an expert in his field and he knows a lot about a lot. And it so happened that he had a run-in with Mr. Fantastic, or more specifically, the entire Fantastic Four. But it was Mr. Fantastic who really had the confrontation and ultimately paid the price for Oc's, mental instability. So his wife, Sue Storm, was pregnant and going into labor, and because of complications arising from the superpowers and radiation and all different things, the only person with the expertise, the knowledge to actually help, the labor and provide the care that they needed was Dr. Octopus. So it's a really tragic story of Mr. Fantastic trying to appeal to Otto's better nature. And again, like so many good villains, well-written villains, Otto believes that he is right. He is a good person. He's just, he does what he has to do. And, he doesn't see himself as an evil human being. So, he wants to help out, but, also for his own ends. But eventually, as it always will do with a character like Dr. Octopus, it ends in tragedy because he is not a stable character. He's not a stable human being. And eventually, Doc Ock and Fantastic end up fighting. And as you're reading it, you're like, no, just please. And it's one of those stories that really kind of hooks you in. And it's Marvel do tragedy so well because Marvel is such an upbeat, happy universe, and sort of happy company where it's more, it's the mighty Marvel manner. When sad stories or tragic stories happen, they really hit you, and it's you remember it, and then 30 years later, you do a YouTube video about it. And folks, those are the 10 times that the wrong hero fought the wrong villain, or the right hero fought the wrong villain. You know what I'm saying. Either way, it's an example of how great Marvel can be, in that it's one shared cohesive universe, and sometimes these characters and stories bleed into each other, and it makes for a lot of fun. So guys, what did you think of this video? Do you like this random collection of characters in this display? Comment below, let me know. Tell me about some of the times that the wrong hero fought the wrong villain that you remember and you enjoy. And before I go, I want to give you like a little bit of admin about, first of all, we have a Facebook page and I'm going to use it a lot more. Facebook and Discord. So Facebook is the main thing that I can communicate through, just because I get very, very sort of forgetful with checking things, but Facebook gives me the notifications and whatnot. So on Facebook right now, I'm taking submissions for suggestions for what bars. I'm going back to the Legends Legacy reviews, and we're about to move on to the Lizard Wave. So we've got Gwenpool, Mysterio, Prowler, Spider-Punk, Spider-Noir, Spider-Woman, the Lizard himself, maybe another one, I forget. But either way, give me your suggestions. Go to the Facebook group and tell me, what bar are the individual members of the Lizard Wave? Also, since I mentioned the Discord, if you enjoy chatting and talking action figures with the people in this community, go to the Discord, the link below, and you can get to know the people in the groups. If you like what you see here and you want to see more, join the 6-1 Clicks by clicking the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And don't forget that notification bell either. And if you really enjoy this, then go over to patreon.com/displaying model behavior. Throw a few shekels my way. And finally, before I go, get ready for the data blast, the best stuff I've found on Instagram. Check the names of the creators, go give them a follow because they do fantastic work. And until next time, keep displaying model behavior.